This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
March 2019. Join the Hard-Traveling Fanboys as they celebrate Marvel Studios' release of Captain Mar-Vell with Captain Mar-Vell Month.
Welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen, to the L-shaped studio in Ho-Ho Loon Plaza, located discreetly in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. We are the Hard-Traveling Fanboys. I'm Greg Phillips. With me, as always, my trusty companion, Nick Duke. And we're here to bring you another edition of our monthly look at a trade paperback or graphic novel collection. It's a little show that we like to call the Longbook Hunters. And Nick, getting over my unsure stuttering there for a moment, how are you doing on this fine, unrevealed day or night?
I'm doing well. I'm looking forward to diving into our topic tonight and diving into the first week of what is going to be Captain Mar-Vell Month here at the L-Shaped Studios. That's right, in honor of the big screen debut of the Captain Mar-Vell concept, and especially Carol Danvers on the big screen. We are going to be dedicating an entire month of shows to that character, and in keeping with that, you know, Captain Mar-Vell, Greg, is one of the few legacy characters, or excuse me, it was one of the few legacy concepts in Marvel up until recent years. And so we're going to be taking a special look at not just Carol Danvers, but we have a week of shows kind of dedicated to each character that has filled that role over the years. So this first week is a very special Longbook Hunt, looking back at the greatest, what many consider to be the greatest story told with the original Captain Mar-Vell, Mar-Vell, that being the death of Captain Mar-Vell, Marvel's very first original graphic novel published back in 1982.
That's right. And in fact, if you have the Marvel Unlimited app, it actually pulls up as Marvel graphic novel number 1, The Death of Captain Mar-Vell.
Right, so don't go looking under the T's for the or D's for death. You have to look under the M's. Marvel Original Graphic Novel 1, The Death of Captain Mar-Vell. Although I believe you can do a search for, creator Jim Starlin, or probably doing a search for Captain Mar-Vell on there would probably pull it up as well. But, you know, if you're looking alphabetically, it's under the M's, folks.
And to be clear, from what Nick was saying, I don't believe that we're going to have a Monica Rambeau focused episode this month.
That's fair. I was speaking about the three most popular incarnations of the character. To lay it out there, we'll be talking some Mar-Vell this week, some Carol Danvers next week. Then we'll have a very special full-length review episode of the movie, and then we'll wrap up the month by talking about a little bit of Kamala Khan.
And by way of history, this was also not the first, perhaps, but one of the first major deaths that we've seen of a prominent superhero in Marvel Comics, or DC Comics for that matter. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, the ramifications of that. But before we talk about that, Nick, by way of history, for those that don't know, you are part of the potentially Welpy award-winning, or Haffy award-winning even, Marvel Age podcast. And you guys have taken a look a little bit at the early days of Captain Mar-Vell. So me, as someone who knows absolutely nothing, literally, I'm not exaggerating here, I knew nothing about Captain Mar-Vell going into this. I know that Carol Danvers is the current Captain Mar-Vell, and I knew that Monica Rambeau was at one time, and I knew that Mar-Vell was the original. But I knew nothing beyond that. I knew about a vague or a vague connection to the Kree Empire. Beyond that, I knew nothing going into this book. But Nick, you have experienced the earliest days of Captain Mar-Vell. So this book, which takes place, I believe, what was Captain Mar-Vell created? 1967. I believe.
he was
correct?
He debuted in the anthology title Mar-Vell Superheroes back in December of 1967, and then was quickly spun off into his own solo title early on in 1968. So we did not, for Mar-Vell Age, I have not read his first appearance, but I did read a couple of issues of his solo series, his early on in the solo series, to kind of get an idea of what his deal was and what his supporting cast was like. And then in our most recent episode that should be out probably by the time you hear this podcast, we visited upon him in 1969, where he was already undergoing a massive status quo shift that saw him basically giving up the Mar-Vell side of his identity in favor of a body sharing scenario with Rick Jones of all people. They essentially did the old Thor Donald Blake gimmick, where whenever Rick Jones clasps the ancient nega bands together, he takes the place of Captain Mar-Vell in the negative zone. Captain Mar-Vell comes out of the negative zone to our Earth, and vice versa. They're able to swap back and forth. So it's a very interesting setup there, somewhat unique. You can hear our full thoughts there, but Captain Mar-Vell, even to this point in our reading that we've encountered him, honestly, kind of a dud of a character to this point. I have not really found the hook to him, and thus I was somewhat apprehensive about jumping all the way forward to 1982 for this podcast and reading, his death, which is considered to be by many the best story ever told involving him. And after reading it, there'll have to be some great stories between 69 and 82 to have a chance of surpassing this.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you have that knowledge, though, that base going in. Interestingly enough, Mar-Vell is one of those characters that my dad read when he was a kid as Captain Marvel. Because when he heard that there was a Captain Marvel movie coming out, he was telling me about how excited he was about it. And I said, well, it's not going to be the Captain Marvel from when you were a kid. And he was like, what do you mean? He said, I said, I didn't even know you knew about Captain Marvel. He was like, yeah, I used to read that. He used to read that when he was a kid in the late 60s, early 70s. And he didn't remember many of the details. He just remembered the costume more than anything.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah. Having read some of the early Captain Marvel, it does seem like they are taking aspects of Mar-Vell's origin and applying them to kind of a mashup of, Carol Danvers and Mar-Vell here in the form of Carol Danvers, because you have Carol Danvers having a strong connection to the Kree as a Kree warrior rather than just being an Earthwoman. Like, there's some sort of amnesia aspect going on in the trailers, it seems like. And also having Jan Rog and the Supreme Intelligence, both of whom were major characters in the early days of Captain Marvel, or of Mar-Vell, who are going to be featured in the film as well. So it seems like they're borrowing elements from the early days of Captain Marvel, but, we'll have to wait and see how that all turns out.
Indeed we shall. And so that's pretty much the extent of my knowledge of Captain Marvel. But I'm happy to report that this book actually, Nick, does a pretty damn good job of giving us a crash course in Captain Marvel history. But before we get into that, we should mention that this book is the brainchild of one Jim Starlin, who we've talked about here on the show before. He's the shepherd of Cosmic Marvel.
Yeah, kind of the godfather of Captain Marvel. Yeah, Marvel Cosmic.
Cosmic, exactly. He's kind of shepherded the development and growth of that side of the Marvel Universe, really, since Stan and Jack kind of parted from it. So it's Starlin, created Thanos, Adam Warlock, all these other prominent characters that sort of span the galaxy in Marvel. And this is his baby. He is the writer, he is the penciler, he is the inker on this comic book. And he is joined by a guy named, I believe, Steve Oliff as the colorist. But other than the colors and the letters, this is a Jim Starlin joint. And he loves this side of Marvel. This is what is his wheelhouse in Marvel Comics. And so he delves right in and explains to us through these audio logs of Captain Marvel his origins, what his powers are, who his enemies were over time, who he's encountered, who his friends were, his relationships along the way. I got to say, Nick, we'll talk about this book more in depth as we go along, but right off the gate, I really appreciated how this was done for a character that let's be honest, not that many people care about or know about.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that they kind of are working into the story in an organic way to give you all this exposition, because it being Marvel's first original graphic novel, I have to think they were trying to market it to some people who had possibly never read Captain Marvel before. So you wanted an element of being able to pick it up and have it, stand alone on its own merits. And so you're given, some background on, like you said, his origins, kind of the different status quos he's enjoyed over the years. And also some of the more immediate events, because what sets up this story is a recent story involving Thanos that I've never read, but they kind of do a pretty good job of filling in the gaps for you, through exposition or through flashbacks to kind of show you, what's going on with this Thanos story. Why is Captain Marvel where he is at this point in the universe? So it all kind of works out. I think it does a good job of not, before rereading Infinity War last year, or Infinity Gauntlet last year, and so this was they were still fresh on my mind, I guess you could say.
Right, and Mentor, for instance, I don't even remember if he was around by the time of Infinity Gauntlet, but he's a character that I really encountered in depth for the first time here. Arrow, certainly we've met him in Infinity Gauntlet and several of these other characters, and it's kind of interesting to go back and see the foundations of what would lead to that epic story that we reviewed here on the podcast. My favorite Marvel Cosmic story to this day. But this was a really good crash course in his history, giving us an idea of who his supporting cast was, and really making it seem like a big deal in the Marvel Universe, even if it wasn't in the grand scheme of things, but making it seem that it was through the eyes of these characters that we see here. And I think that's a good way to kind of delve into this. Is the book is called The Death of Captain Marvel, and one of the things that I admired about this book, Nick, is there's no pretenses in it about what it is. Mm-hmm. Pretty early on, you get the diagnosis of Captain Marvel as having cancer, and it actually ties it back to an incident that I don't know if it was actually from the comics, Nick. Maybe you might know this. I don't know if it was actually from an existing comic or if it's something that Starlin kind of retconned into this story, where Captain Marvel had encountered this leaking vat of chemicals, and he touched it with his bare skin, and it ended up infecting him and giving him cancer. And that cancer had been put off for years by his negabands, but now even negabands cannot stop the cancer from spreading. It's spreading, and he finds out that it's going to kill him, and he's only got a matter of months to live.
Apparently, over
the course of these 66 pages.
I just looked this up, Greg. That actually did occur in Captain Marvel 34 back in September of 1974, and it was written by Jim Starlin.
There you go. Great little bit of continuity there, which is something that would kind of unlikely to be done today, I think, because there's such a tighter focus on continuity in those days, in some ways anyway, of making things from the past matter and playing them up in a continuous fashion the way that he did in this case. So great job by Starlin of bringing that back and tying it in. And one of the only times that I've ever...
Excuse me, he did not write it. He penciled it. Steve Englehart wrote that issue. I got that wrong. But nonetheless, Starlin was a member of the creative team for that issue.
Yes. So I've seen a couple of comics in my lifetime, which obviously comes after... I was born in 84. This book came out in 82. But I've read a couple comics since then, explored superheroes or superhero supporting characters going through terminal illnesses. But this had to be just mind-blowing at the time. Superhero, an established, had his own solo title at one time, even though he'd been laying dormant for a few years. Superhero having terminal cancer, a very heavy topic for a comic book. And it's so different from what we've gotten used to of superheroes fighting maybe an airborne virus or fighting, of course, their arch enemies, things like that. Yeah. But to have a terminal illness that there is nothing you can do to fight it had to be really groundbreaking for its time.
Absolutely. I mean, especially consider through the modern context, for you and I, readers of a certain age, I think we all instantly jumped to Death of Superman. And that was a death very much a hero's death. You know, he went through this knockdown, drag-out fight in an attempt to protect Metropolis that was this big, over-the-top action sequence where he just, you know, literally went out swinging. Something for me that had a personal effect, Death of Spider-Man in the Ultimate Universe. Very much a big, drawn-out smackdown between he and the Green Goblin. More recently, the death of the Mighty Thor, kind of the same thing, where she was, you know, Jane Foster was battling cancer, but also had a very physical battle to fight as well in the course of that story. Here, there's not really that. You keep waiting, I think, for there to be some sort of big physical throwdown, and the only real kind of showdown or climactic action sequence we get is something that takes place entirely inside Captain Marvel's own head, as he's kind of slowly coming to terms with his own death, and it's done through in the mental guise of his greatest enemy, Thanos.
Yeah, it's something they save for the very end of the book, literally the very end of the book, and it's more to do with this character accepting his own demise. But as a story, this is really about the acceptance of death more than anything, both by the patient, in this case Captain Marvel, and by those closest to him, his friends, his family, his lover, how those people react.
Or lovers, depending on how you read a certain scene.
It's all about that. It's all about that process of the stages of grief. You know, he's in denial briefly. He's angry. He accepts it finally, and those around him have to accept it. And it adds up to, it's a tragic story, but it's also one that adds agency to a character that didn't have much before that. And so I found myself shockingly, I'll be honest, when I was first starting this story, about maybe 20 pages in, I was like, oh my gosh, this is not going to be for me. And we'll talk about some of the things I didn't like in a little bit. Mm-hmm. But as it went along, I just simply got more and more into it. And I just got more and more into it. And it became a
Greg? Whoop. Hello? There he is. There's Greg, I think.
Nick?
Brief technical difficulties here on the Hard-Traveling Fanboys, but let's continue on. You got more and more into it, you were saying.
Yes, Nick, I am here, and hopefully you can hear me.
I can.
And, yes, what I was saying is I got more and more into it as I saw how committed the book was to its premise, that it wasn't going to give us any, to use wrestling terminology, Nick, no hope spots in this. Mm-hmm. There's never really a moment in there where there's even a glimpse of hope that he is going to recover. There are a couple, I guess there's the research when they bring in all the big minds of the Marvel Universe at the time, Reed Richards, the Beast, Tony Stark, Doctor Strange, Black Panther, all these great minds come together. And there may be a couple moments where you might think of the reader, oh, they're going to come up with something. But really, the book doesn't deceive the reader. At no point does the reader think, okay, Cap's going to survive this like usual. He accepts it, and they accept it. And really, the heroes are almost defeated from the time they start trying to help him, right? From the minute they start trying to help, they're pretty much accepting of, well, there's nothing, we're not going to be able to do this.
Right. And I mean, he says at one point, whenever they're just beginning to analyze him, to take a look at his medical issues, he said he's known for a while that he had it, and that he was kind of dreading, you know, having to tell people and having to undergo medical testing and stuff. So this is a character who kind of has known, through the power of cosmic awareness, has kind of known what his fate was going to be. And the book is really not about him fighting death, but learning to accept death. And, you know, again, compared to so many death stories that we've read in the last 20 to 30 years, it's a different approach. It's an approach that is, I mean, it really fulfills that if you think, as many
it's about him fighting with his family.
fighting with his family. If you think, as many think, that the entire point of the Marvel Universe, as it was conceived in 1961, was to be more of a reflection of what we see outside our doors, there's no more death story in comics that's more of a reflection of what we see outside of our doors than this. I mean, this is him having a chronic illness, like a terminal illness, just like any normal human being would do, and having to learn to accept the inevitability of it all.
I don't know, Nick. I think Wolverine being encased in a shell of adamantium is much closer to what's going on outside our doors.
Mm-hmm.
That's just me, though.
There you go.
But yeah, no, you're totally right about that. It's a reflection of real life in a way that I think is a very Marvel story. That's what Marvel was built on originally. We kind of lose track of that with kind of how it's gone over the years. But Marvel was intended to be a more reflective of reality version of superhero comics. And certainly this one hits heavy with, particularly, Nick, the ending of this comic. I can see where people would have been frustrated by the ending of this book if they were expecting more of an epilogue approach, or more of a satisfying conclusion, to put it that way. But I loved the end of this. So you have the big sequence with Thanos where that's almost inside Mar-Vell's mind as he finally accepts death and embraces it and moves on. And then they turn off life support, and then they just say he's gone. And then the book ends.
Yep.
Total blackness. It's over. And I loved it. I thought that was as powerful an ending as you could possibly have in that situation. And it gave it even more parallels with the death of Superman, which I'll address more here in a few minutes.
Absolutely. It's a perfect ending. It is an ending that, and it's hard to say what people really expected in 1982, but I can tell you, having read so many death of, or, death stories that tease death, you expect them to follow certain beats and then to kind of pull the rug out from under you at the end. That's what we've been conditioned to expect from a modern context. And so it was very refreshing to see a story that just didn't rely on any of that. So, yeah, I mean, I was very impressed. And it's especially, I think I'm more impressed by this story based on the fact that coming into it, I was expecting to not like it because I just don't care about the character of Captain Marvel. So, it's probably an example of lowered expectations causing me to enjoy the book, more than I probably should have. Whereas in the case of certain other books that we've caught flack for not liking here on the podcast, when they were built up to me for years, and then I read it and was kind of like, it's very much a case of expectations relative to quality, I think.
Yes, I agree. And also, of its time, 1982, you're still on kind of the tail end of the Bronze Age there of comics. Mm-hmm. So this book is filled with exposition everywhere, giant blocks of text, but that was the style at the time. And it's executed pretty well here. I mean, there are portions of this book that I thought were slow, were maybe glacially paced. There were parts of this book that I thought were corny and didn't work for me. But on the whole, I appreciated the fact that Jim Starlin takes his time with this story. He doesn't. One of my pet peeves with the modern death cycle in comics, because there are so many deaths in comics now, so many death ofs, and every one of them now rushes through everything, in my opinion. They rush through the death itself. They rush through the grieving process. And, of course, they rush to the return. This book doesn't rush anything. Even if you could argue it's to its detriment a couple times, it does not rush the process. It allows this feeling of dread to linger. And it allows you to really focus on this as a more intimate character piece than as a typical superhero book. We had this conversation, I don't remember if it was on the podcast or back when we were doing the column, when they killed off Damian Wayne, DC. And they did these excellent grieving issues, like 3 or 4 grieving issues of the different Batman titles. But then it took only like 2 or 3 months and Damian was back. And the grieving was really over by then. Batman got over the death of Damian pretty quick. And I hated that because the deaths themselves are not what is interesting. It's how people react to those deaths that are interesting, and what those deaths mean in their universes. And I think that what this does is show a commitment to exploring how this death of Captain Marvel affects the greater Marvel universe. Now, whether you buy that Captain Marvel dying would have this great of an effect on the Marvel universe is another story entirely. But Jim Starlin has a story he's trying to tell, and he does a damn good job of telling it, given the constraints of, having to fill everything with text and dramatic poses here all over the place and everything. I really appreciated that aspect, Nick, of how this story really took the time to tell the story, working a body part, if you will.
Absolutely. It is a little slow paced, I'll grant you, but I guess I'm not as bothered by that being a student of Brian Michael Bendis comics, that I'm kind of used to something that moves at a slower pace. But again, to me, it's a unique approach. It's something that I haven't seen a ton of. And ultimately, the concept wins out, even if there are moments, like you said, where the execution falters a bit.
Yeah, and before I forget about this, I should probably mention, I talked about the parallels with the death of Superman. To me, I don't know if it was conscious, but to me, there's no question that this book was a huge influence on the death of Superman, which came out, oddly enough, Nick, 10 years after this story.
Mm-hmm.
Almost on the money. 10 years, 82 to 92. And the death of Superman is laid out in a very similar fashion. Whereas, yes, this is about a terminal illness, and the death of Superman, as you put it earlier, is a giant throwdown between two characters. The similarities come in that throughout the death of Superman, you're getting these, in addition to the Superman Doomsday confrontation, you're getting these sort of asides, these side stories of, remember the kid Mitch? Mm-hmm. that hates Superman, mm-hmm. and how he comes to his view of Superman changes over the course of the story. You flash to Lois and Jimmy and Perry and all these other characters, Cat Grant, Bibbo, who have encountered Superman over the years, and how they're watching this fight unfold and how they're reacting to what's happening. And you're seeing what Superman's impact was on their lives. That Bibbo tells a story about Superman helping him, get this bar and build himself up from the streets and everything. It's this great kind of parallel storytelling that's going on, which is similar to what we see in this. Also, the death of Captain Marvel ends suddenly. He's gone. The death of Superman very similarly ends on that iconic shot of Lois holding Superman's body in her hands, crying as he's dying, and the douche narrators, the Bloodwind says, "It cannot end like this," and the narrator's like, "But it will," and then it says he dies or whatever. So very similar approaches here. So as somebody that has grown up reading the death of Superman since I was a little boy, I really almost was taken aback by the similarities of structure and pacing over the course of this book.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. There were some similarities. You're a little bit more familiar with that Superman than I am. Probably have reread it more times, but I could even see some of the parallels. To me, the biggest one is just that sense of dread. Granted, mm-hmm. it's a little bit more intense in the case of a character like Superman, who you're more attached to, but you definitely get this sense of foreboding throughout both stories, because you know how it's going to end, and it's just a matter of time.
Now, let's talk about some of the negatives here. Okay. And one that I wanted to talk about that I will refer to as Kirkmanitis, which is the need at times to hello, random person sending me a friend request. How are you doing? I'm sure you're real.
Twitter or Facebook?
Facebook.
Oh.
I'm sure you're real. But anyway.
Is it a lady?
Yes. And we have 0 mutual friends.
Oh, so. Always a good sign.
Yes. And her name is Catalina, like the Catalina wine mix.
Maybe she's trying to hit you up to see if you're interested in being her sugar daddy.
Now that's not for us to say here on the Hard-Traveling Fanboys. podcast. I'm just saying that perhaps all will rise.
We're just saying that there's some stuff about it that might kind of blow your mind.
Oh, speaking of which, Nick, I need to go to Malibu Owl's used car emporium at some point. Anyway, where were we at? God, what else?
You were talking about stuff. Kirkmanitis,
where, and I think that in the case, yes, there are moments like that in the death of Superman. I can acknowledge that, where characters are like, gosh, Superman is so great. The difference is, it's true with Superman. Like, you know, when characters say, oh, Superman saved my family from drowning or whatever, or saved my cat from a tree, or stopped the train from wrecking that I was on, you believe it because it's freaking Superman. And he's got 60 years at that point, in 1992, almost 60 years of cultural cash built up, where he's done all these things and he's been on these adventures, and he's literally worked with everyone in the DC universe. All of these heroes have been affected by him in some way or another. Here's the problem with Captain Marvel. It's just not true. He's worked with the Avengers, certainly, but according to what our buddy Tim Capel said, he never really worked with the X-Men. And yet the X-Men are there front and center talking about how many times they worked with Captain Marvel, Spider-Man, all these other characters that claim to have worked so close. The Hulk, who worked so closely with Captain Marvel, and they're just lining up to fawn over him and talk about how great he is. And literally, you have characters. I think the character of Mentor says 3 times during this book some version of he's the greatest hero among all of us. Like 3 or 4 times. And I got to admit, that got a little old after a while. I was like, okay, I get it, Jim. You're trying to get us to believe that this character is important. But, you know, there's other ways to do that than have characters literally say, boy, this character is important and awesome and you should love him.
Yeah, you could have easily gotten across the sacrifices he had made in life, because one thing that is mentioned in the book, but probably should have been played up a little bit, was the fact that he had essentially chosen exile from his own people to be among Earth and to serve as a hero of Earth. You play that up, you don't need to directly just tell us how great he is a little bit. We kind of make that connection ourselves, even if we aren't personally connected to the character.
Exactly. It felt like a cheat to try to get the audience to care as much about Captain Marvel as Jim does. And I think there's, like you said, there's other ways to go about that besides the annoying everybody talks about how great this person is, which we've seen in comics many, many times. Every era has its character that whether it was the Sentry a decade ago, whether it was Nate Gray when I was in middle school, or whatever character it may be at a given time. I remember DC trying to push Damage really hard at one point in the 90s. And whoever it is they're trying to push at a given point, it gets annoying after a while. But,
hell, Bloodwind's appearance in Death of Superman is a pretty good example.
Yeah, Blood. It's come out in this way. I don't know why I always read him in that accent, but anyway.
You read him as animated Magneto?
No, that's Charles. The only thing I can say as animated Magneto is Charles. In any event, so that's one negative. The other negative was there are times when the coloring, and this, I don't know if this is a reproduction issue or not, but there are times when the coloring in this book almost looks like it was done with crayon, particularly in the early going.
I was going to say, I think whatever scan they have of this book, it looked like there were definitely some production issues. I noticed a couple of times where there would be like letters of word bubbles that were whited out or whatever.
Whited out, or even words that were spaced apart too much in production or something.
So I noticed that. I wonder if there weren't some sort of archival issues with the original art, and they wound up having to do a scan of a actual printed copy that underwent.
That's what that's kind of what it looks like, and perhaps a flawed printed copy of it as well. So yeah, I don't want to harp on that too much, because you're right. It could have just been a reproduction issue for digital. But yeah, was there anything that didn't work for you, Nick, in the course of the story?
I mean, the opening isn't the most thrilling thing in the world, because it kind of starts off as a conventional superhero story, where they're going out to investigate, Thanos' old ship or whatever. And the things I like about this book are all the things that you don't see in conventional superhero stories, because when you're telling a straightforward story with Captain Marvel, he's kind of the black hole at the center of it. He's just not interesting enough to carry a story such as that. So The first 10 pages aren't the best thing in the world, but once they dispense with that, it's pretty solid to very, very good throughout the entire rest of the book, in my opinion.
Yeah. So, with all that said, and we haven't talked about the art at all. I think the art's really good throughout. I mean, Starlin has some really, really great pages here that are reminiscent of what we would see years later, but drawn by other guys. But some of the panels here, I think particularly the panels that show the parallel of Captain Marvel and Thanos towards the end, when it's showing him laying on a deathbed and then Thanos and his stone version kind of coming to life. I thought that was really cool. Of course, anybody would be excited by the close-up of Rick Jones's mouth. I thought, talking about his strong, sensuous voice.
Yes.
That's one of the great panels. I think one of the Skrull commander giving a Nazi salute was certainly a thing that happened. Mm-hmm. And what else do I have here? We haven't talked about "Damn My Stars."
Damn my stars! Yes. They have to say it as Alec Baldwin's Charles Nelson Riley, though.
Oh, damn my stars!
There you go. We also haven't talked about our favorite scene in the book, surprisingly one that was initiated by Rick Jones, who is a terrible character, as you've heard me talk about on the Marvel Age podcast.
Rick Jones, who is a very good character in this book.
Yeah, he kind of is seeking a way to help his friend, and he gathers together the smartest heroes, all the big minds from throughout the Marvel universe on Earth, and kind of says, hey, I know you guys often have other interests, but there has to be something that your collective intelligence can do to find a cure for this cancer. And the narration is kind of saying what Rick Jones doesn't know is they've already been working on this, and each one of them is asking themselves, why didn't we start working on this sooner for the greater good? And each one of themselves finds their answer lacking. It's just a great, it's a great examination of, why don't our superheroes concern themselves with the more mundane, day-to-day concerns of common people rather than always, the big smash-up fight. It's just one of those examples of causing our heroes to look inward at themselves and recognize that even in heroism, they're not always without flaw.
And there's always these great bits in Starlin books, it seems, in between. Some of the dialogue can be a little stiff at times, for sure, but sometimes he'll just come out with these really philosophical observations or truths. And one in particular is Thanos is beating on Captain Marvel in his brain, and he says to him, but that is what life is truly about, a continuous series of pains. What a great line from Thanos, Nick. I
agree. Yeah, Thanos' usage here, it's brief, but it's perfect.
Yep. And outside of that, I think that's pretty much all I got to say about that. Overall thoughts on the death of Captain Marvel?
Very good. Very different, especially, again, if you're viewing it through a modern lens looking back, very, very different than what you would get from a similar story in today's day and age. I give it a recommendation. It's, at the very least, even if you don't care about the character of Captain Marvel, you're not going to find too many other stories that are like this. So, thumbs up for me.
I have to give it a thumbs up as well. I was hesitant about this book in the early going, as you know, Nick. I was having trouble with the exposition, with the dialogue, with the fact that I didn't care about Captain Marvel or the Titans in this case. But over the course of this book, I really grew to admire the fact that it was committed to its premise in a way that very few superhero comics really are. I mean, most death stories in comics mean nothing. And that's because they contradict themselves. They go back on promises to the reader. They remove stakes because of bringing people right back from the dead, even in the course of one story. And so I appreciated how Jim Starlin committed to this story from beginning to end and never wavered, never delineated from the path that he had put in place for Captain Marvel to die of this particular illness. They didn't have a villain show up and give him a hero's death, or let him go out on his shield. It was a really, in some ways, powerful and affecting story. I don't think it's one of necessarily the greatest Marvel stories of all time, but I think it's a really good one, and it's one that ended up impressing me so much more than I thought it would. So definitely, I'm going to go thumbs up on it.
Awesome.
And with that said, we're going to take, well, actually, before we take a little break, let's tell you how you can give us feedback on this. What are your thoughts on the death of Captain Marvel? Tweet us. I am at gphillips8652. He is at Nick Duke 87. Join the Place to Be Nation Comics Facebook page. Just type in Place to Be Nation Comics and join up and join the conversation about this book, about Jim Starlin's contributions to Marvel in general. Love to have that conversation. And also you can email us at the loneliest email addresses on the internet. Those, of course, being Greg P. at placetobenation.com and Nick D. at placetobenation.com. We're going to take a little break and let JT and Chad tell you about all the other great shows, great feeds here at Place to Be Nation Pop and Place to Be Nation Wrestling. And when we come back, we're going to have Reading and Watching and the Rundown and probably the Wrestling Minute, too.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
Place to Be Nation's JT Rosero and Chad Campbell here. We want to let you know that we have over 24 podcasts available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and PlaceToBeNation.com. We now offer them to you on two great feeds. On the Place to Be Nation Wrestling feed, we dive into topics running the gamut from today's WWE to the glory days of yesteryear and the ins and outs of the territory days. In addition to our full-length shows, we also deliver to you special pod blasts on topics old and new.
The Place to Be Nation Pop feed is a veritable treasure trove of great content. Offer tremendous shows covering the land of movies, television, life, comics, and sports, brought to you by the most knowledgeable and insightful folks in the podcast world.
You can find all these great shows, plus archives of our past podcasts from over the past 8 years as well by subscribing to both feeds on iTunes. And while you're there, be sure to rate and leave feedback as well. All of these shows, plus others, available on PlaceToBeNation.com, where we cover pro wrestling, sports, movies, comics, plus in-depth search projects, and much more. Be sure to support our site by using www.PlaceToBeNation.com/Amazon when doing your online shopping. We want to thank our friends at Boneheads, Wing Bar, ProWrestlingOnly.com, and HistoryOfWrestling.com as well. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr. PlaceToBeNation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Hard-Traveling Fanboys. And before we get cracking on the rest of our show, we just want to make sure that you're aware of all the other great content here at Place to Be Nation on both the pop and wrestling feeds this week. And for instance, over on the Place to Be Nation wrestling feed, you can check out the latest episode of Wrestling Warzone featuring our buddies JT and Chad, looking at Raw and Nitro from December 11th of 95, Nick.
Wow. Big events, I'm sure, happened in December of 95, even if I couldn't tell you what they were. And then you also, of course, have a new episode of Main Event. So there's that.
Yes, and they are going to be looking, of course, at WWE news and New Japan Pro Wrestling Classic match picks. Over on our feed, Place to Be Nation Pop, we are going to have the latest episodes of both Marvel Age Masterclass and Marvel Age Podcast available for your listening pleasure right now, looking at the year 1969. Nick, how's that been going for you?
It's been going well. You know, we all enjoy a good 69 whenever possible, and this week, Ben Morse and his special guest, Todd Weber, get to take a look at the first part of the 69, and then the Sarcastic Four get back together to discuss the second part of the 69 as we wrap up the decade that saw the birth of the Marvel Universe and get ready to move forward into the afterbirth of the 70s.
Absolutely. And Laugh In Theater, a new show, has debuted right here on Place to Be Nation Pop, hosted by the illustrious and the ubiquitous Andy Atherton, alongside his guest, Scott Criscolo, and they are looking at the movie Caddyshack. Any strong memories of Caddyshack, Nick?
Oh, a wonderful film that I've grown up with and enjoy very much. It's also notable because it seems like Andy Atherton is coming for our good friend Jennifer Smith's podcasting crown, trying to knock her off in terms of number of shows produced per month here at Place to Be Nation.
Could there be a new Village Bicycle here at Place to Be Nation? Pup.
Perhaps it'll just be a 2-seater from now on.
Oh, they make those. That's right. Well, let's move on from that and on to a little segment that we like to call Reading and Watching.
Mm-hmm.
Nick, do we even need to bother asking if either one of us have read anything other than this?
No.
All right, well, we haven't. But watching. The CW shows are on a break right now, except for Supergirl, which I haven't watched.
Nope, it's also on a break.
Oh, well, then it's on a break, too, so we don't have to talk about it.
The annual random CW mid season break, or whatever the fuck they call it.
There's no point in us complaining about it anymore. It's stupid, it's dumb, it shouldn't happen, but it will happen till the end of time,
yes.
Or at least until the end of CW Arrowverse. So they're all on break, but I have been watching something comic book related. I have started on, and actually 2 things comic book related now that I think about it. 3 things. My goodness gracious, Nick. It's just too much Greg on this episode. You see, David Sunday and I finally watched the mid-season premiere of The Walking Dead over on AMC.
Tell me more.
And not a great episode, honestly. Not very good at all, in fact. It was continuing a tradition of really, really crappy mid-season premieres for The Walking Dead. And just very slow, very boring, lots of slow-motion shots of people looking at each other. Everything that I don't like about the show. And then it had a really awesome ending, I thought. It had a very compelling ending and had me hooked for the next episode. But I was like, where was that the previous 45 minutes, you know? So a frustrating viewing experience. And boy, I hope they can regain their mojo from the end of the first half of the season quickly, because that's tough. Also, the acting was really good. The performance was great from everybody involved. I am still not in on Babyface Negan. I know a lot of people are now jumping on board with that, it seems, on social media, but I still don't want to see Babyface Negan, Nick.
I can't blame you. I'm not watching, obviously, so I have no context, but I told you that Babyface Negan was a bridge too far for me, and when they didn't kill him off, when they didn't veer from the comics, that was my jump the shark moment for Walking Dead, and I haven't been back since.
I cannot believe that there is any path to everybody just moving past the fact that he bludgeoned their friends to death in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so
burned their hometown.
Yep. David and I also watched the series premiere of Doom Patrol on the DC Universe app. You watched that one yet, Nick?
No, I have not. I've heard good things though. Although, you know, I wasn't.
Oh, it was great.
I wasn't as high on the Doom Patrol episode of Titans as most everybody else was. So I have to admit, I haven't felt this great sense of urgency to get out there and watch it.
Oh, it's great. It was awesome. I was really impressed by it. Maybe some pacing issues, a little bit, a little on the. You know, I thought a little bit towards the end of the episode, it got started to drag a little bit until they got to that finishing sequence. But overall, outstanding, really funny, really weird. I think that is the craziest thing about this, Nick, is the show is actually living up to its reputation of how weird it was going to be. Very weird, very meta. Alan Tudyk's narration is out of this world great throughout the episode. I think the biggest surprise to me was how much I cared about these characters, and in particular, the character of Robotman, played by Brendan Fraser.
Brendan Fraser beat the Scorpion King.
Yes, Brendan Fraser did beat the Scorpion King. In this case, his backstory was so well done that at points you hate him, you like him, and then there is a twist in this episode that makes you love him and makes you, or at least in my case, made me love him and made me so empathetic towards him and complicated the way that you view the entire Doom Patrol as a concept. And then it just gets even weirder at the end. And I loved it. I thought it was a great premiere. better than the Titans premiere for sure. And I'm looking forward to seeing where this show goes.
Mm-hmm.
And then, since I was on the DCU app already, I figured, you know what? Why not just cruise on over and start on Young Justice Outsiders, Season 3 of Young Justice. Nick, you'd been talking about it recently, and I'm not sure how far you've gotten into the season.
I've seen 3 episodes.
That's exactly how many I've seen.
Awesome. To make sure it ends with them leaving, what's the place? Markovia, and coming back to that's the end of the 3rd episode, right?
Yes. The last thing that happened in the episode that I watched involved Geoforce.
Yeah, the character who will become Geoforce. Yes,
being driven from his homeland,
right? That's
so
the
to
last thing
speak.
I saw as well. Yes.
Yep, I started watching that first episode, and then in typical Young Justice fashion, I had to see how that story arc resolved. And it's really a 3-issue arc that takes place in Markovia. Man, this show just didn't miss a beat, did it?
No, it didn't. Were you lost? Did you find yourself remembering the dynamics and stuff? Because that's the main reason I rewatched the first 2 seasons before jumping into this.
There were moments there when I was. I have to admit, I actually went back and before I watched those 3 episodes, I actually watched the finale to season 2 to kind of refresh myself.
Right.
And that reminded me of several things. But I say rewatch. I didn't watch the whole thing. I watched like the last 2 minutes of the finale from last season to refresh myself on how the show ended. So I didn't know why Roy Harper, or if it was Roy Harper's clone, I guess, Will Harper, who was living with Artemis. I was kind of in the dark on that. I couldn't remember the dynamic on that. There were elements of.
I believe it's supposed to be Roy Harper because it's Artemis's niece and her niece's father living with them, right?
That's right. Yeah,
yes.
I think that's right.
Because her sister was Cheshire.
Wasn't the big reveal that Roy was not really Roy last season?
But the Roy that was around was the Roy that fathered Leanne with Cheshire. Yep. So it was and in the episode we see her at the high chair or something like that, I think. Right.
That's right. Yep. So I was a little confused on that when I was watching it, and there were a couple other character dynamics that I was kind of like in the dark on. I didn't know why Superman was, but I'm sure a lot of it's going to be resolved, revealed. Why was Superman at the Justice League meeting? Let
me tell you what I loved. The fact that if you remember, in between seasons 1 and 2, they had a time jump as well, and they used the time jump to kind of to have the will they or won't they with Superboy and McGann, and have them break up. Then eventually, over the course of season 2, they get back together. I thought they would do something similar in between seasons 2 and 3, and not only do they not do that, but when they come back. My God, Scott Steiner is making another appearance here on the Hard-Traveling Fanboys. But when they come back with the season 3, not only do they not go back to the will they or won't they they double down on the will they aspect of that, which I thought was brilliant.
Yes. I love that too. I love the relationships that carried over. The usage of all of the original team members was perfect here.
Yes.
Whether it was Nightwing leading the covert mission, which is my favorite Nightwing. When
they reveal the current status quo for Calderon, it is like the most earned thing. It feels like something that was a natural progression of the entire show to this point, and you desperately want to see him succeed in this role.
And it begs the question.
What in the world going on that side of the L-shaped studios over there?
Quite frankly, there's a lot of chaos going on apparently outside, but outside of the L-shaped studio. But in any event, it begs the question of where are certain other figures, right?
Right.
At this moment, and perhaps that too will be addressed over the course of the season. I appreciated all of that. I also appreciated the continuing build to. We don't see Darkseid. We don't see Apocalypse at all, but we see the technology everywhere, and we know that it's coming because we've seen him at the end of season 2.
And the credit and the opening title sequence now heavily features Apocalypse, telling you that this is where we're going. Get ready for it.
Get ready for it, but I love that they're again not rushing it. They're not rushing to it, and the whole story was just great. All of the actors are fantastic. Kari Payton is just dynamic every time, no matter what he does.
How great was that watchtower scene, by the way? The entire thing.
Oh, fantastic!
Yes,
fantastic. So true to character, all the characters,
every character. Yes, not just Batman, Green Arrow, and Aqualad, but all the characters, really.
And I'm hoping to find out why Superman wasn't involved, like why he wasn't even at the meeting. That'll be interesting to find out. So yeah, all of it was.
I would assume, just pure speculation at this point, that Superman would have already resigned his position because of the Lex oversight at some point.
Yeah, good point. He looked angry at the end of season 2. So, and the usage. What a great Lex Luthor in a time when we're getting some really crappy versions of Lex. It's nice to see a closer to Clancy Brown version of Lex.
Yes.
So yeah, all of that stuff was great. Biggest surprise is the heavy usage of Black Lightning,
who is great. By the way,
yes,
it's a different version than the version on the CW show
because he's younger.
Yeah, a little bit younger, and the portrayal is a little bit different, but it is no less effective. And like they kind of have him positioned as like the only hero on this show that hasn't kind of become desensitized to like the everyday toll that this takes on normal everyday people. Like when people are losing their lives, he seems to be the only one who is willing to stand up and go, this just isn't right.
Yeah. He's like a less annoying Dale from The Walking Dead.
A little bit.
With regular eyebrows.
Yes.
So yeah, really good stuff. Enjoying Young Justice Outsiders. Looking forward to watching more of it in the coming weeks. But with that being said, we got nothing else on reading and watching, and the only thing I'm playing right now is Red Dead Redemption 2, so I haven't been playing anything comic book related. So let's just move on to our look at the news and notes in the world of comics, a segment known the world over as the Rundown.
Welcome to the Rundown.
Well, Nick, Oscar season has come and gone, and for the first time, and not the first time, but for one of the few times, comic books made a big impression on the Oscars this year, Nick.
Multiple films, yes.
Yes. Namely, Black Panther, which was nominated for Best Picture, officially won 3 Academy Awards. Achievement in Costume Design, Achievement in Production Design, and Achievement in Music Written for Motion Pictures, a.k.a. Original Score, which was awarded, of course, to Ludwig Göransson. So good on Black Panther for taking home some well-deserved Oscars, right?
Absolutely. It was, very well-deserved. I know a lot of people were pulling for it for Best Picture. I think we all kind of knew that was a long shot from the jump, but it was still a landmark moment for a superhero film to have a film even nominated. So 3 Academy Award victories, and then a nomination in the landmark category. All big accomplishments. But then there was another film that did well that I was honestly even more excited to see win in its category.
And I would argue even a bigger win and a bigger story here, which is that Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse won the Oscar for Best Animated Feature Film, beating out Pixar's Incredibles 2, Isle of Dogs, Mirai, and Ralph Breaks the Internet.
Yeah, for the record, that is beating out a Pixar film, a Disney Animation Studios film, and a Wes Anderson film. Those are 3 things that the Oscars the Academy typically loves the hell out of.
Yeah.
And that just goes to show you how damn good Into the Spider-Verse was.
Yep.
I mean, strictly, again, the story is compelling, the characters are great, but strictly from a technical standpoint, it's the most impressive animated movie that I may have ever seen. To me, it is like whatever the revolution, the first time we all saw Toy Story in 1995 and how big of a accomplishment that was, this is equally so to me in terms of just the technique of animation.
Yeah, it's the style of the future, I believe. It's that sort of 3D Pixar look that dominated the last 20 years of animation for the better part. I think this is going to sort of take that place moving forward. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel it will. And the more removed I get from it, the more I think that while my emotional attachment will always give Infinity War an edge, perhaps, as a film, I think this was probably the best comic book movie of the year. And one of the best ever. One of the best Spider-Man stories that I've seen, comics or film. So, loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Absolutely.
Well, let's move on to the next little story here, which we've got on our list, which anyone with a brain would know has to be the fact that Aquaman 2 even, has officially gotten its release date. December 16th, 2022. A theatrical release date for the planned Aquaman sequel. This according to Entertainment Weekly.
Honestly, I'm a little surprised they're going to take that long. That's a full 4 years in between the two films, and I figured I would have thought 2021 would have been more likely. But hey, still made a ton of money. It was very successful. People seem to like it for the most part.
And if the focus on effects is going to be as heavy as we expect, they may need that long to get it right. So,
yeah. And in related news, because it's also under the DC banner, we actually have a little bit of late breaking news here, Greg, that just came down. Will Smith has exited the Suicide Squad sequel. He will not be returning, despite originally being contracted for multiple films. Sources, this is coming from Variety, sources say scheduling was the ultimate factor, and the decision was made on amicable terms between both sides with no hard feelings. Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn, however, is still expected to reprise her role in the Suicide Squad sequel.
I'm actually bummed by that. I know that it's divisive online in terms of Will Smith's performance as Deadshot. I thought he was really good. I thought he was one of the only good things about Suicide Squad.
Yeah, the only three there were three characters who were decent in Suicide Squad: Will Smith's Deadshot, Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn, and Jai Courtney's Captain Boomerang. That was it. That's all you had.
Yep. And I'm bummed that this opportunity's fallen by the wayside to sort of have a movie as good as the character of Deadshot. Because I thought Will did a good job on this. So that's kind of a bummer, in my opinion. But nonetheless, I'm happy that James Gunn is writing and directing it. So we'll have to see how all that turns out. Well, speaking of DC, let's move back to the DCU app and Season 2 of Titans, because we have our Connor Kent, a.k.a. Superboy. Actor Joshua Orpin, who I know nothing about, has been cast as Connor, who will be a key character in the series' second season, the angsty teen of Steel searching for purpose and the truth of his past. I'll be honest with you, Nick. I don't remember the post-credit scene on Titans. I hope that I watched it, but I don't remember it. So
it cut to some people, somebody being chased through the woods or whatever, and the implication, and then you see the T-shirt.
That's right. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, loved it. Yeah. So Connor, aka Connell, is going to be coming to the screen for the first time in live action, as far as I know. So pretty cool. I'm excited about it. Should be interesting. Hopefully they're not going to lean too heavily on a New 52 influenced Superboy, and hopefully it's more of a traditional Connor Kent. We'll see.
Let's hope so.
And let's move on to the printed page, because we've got news that those Walmart giant editions that DC's been printing, Nick?
Yes.
Well, now they are going to expand into comic stores as well. DC co-publisher and our good friend Dan DiDio has announced that the line of 100-page giant anthologies will not be Walmart exclusive anymore and will now be available in comic book stores. Or actually says will be available in comic book stores eventually. He says that the line is successful and continuing. We are looking to expand the number of original pages in each book and include distribution to the direct market. So look for that later this year. Thoughts?
I have no thoughts, really. Like, I will probably at some point try to engage with these stories particularly the Bendis ones and the ones that sound interesting to me through alternate means, but I was not going to Walmart to seek out these 100-page giants.
My God, giants walking among us. What's the world coming to, Nick?
I don't know.
Well, that wasn't the only news that Danny D dropped in the last week. Because we got some more news coming our way. And that is that DC, this is according to Newsarama, DC plans to reduce, or as this article says, reduce the number of collected editions it releases due to perceived glut in the marketplace, according to co-publisher Dan DiDio. This comes following a presentation at this past weekend's closed-door Comics Pro annual meeting. DiDio says, quote, "We feel there are too many collections in the market, bro, and the shelves are overcrowded with nothing standing out. We are rethinking ways to build collections, including adding material in the print versions, bro, that will not be available in the digital."
Okay, if he's saying that nothing is standing out on the shelves, let me tell you what's going to happen. DC's going to cut back on what they're offering, which is going to take up less physical space on shelves at big-time retailers like Barnes & Noble or whatever your major bookseller is in your area. Marvel's going to keep cranking out publications, and then you're going to go, and 75% of the space is going to be taken up by Marvel compared to 25% by DC, and it's going to make DC look minor league by comparison. I hate everything about this story.
Me too.
It is, again, I prefer to engage with my stories through the single-issue print format, but it makes no sense to move away from an aggressive collected edition strategy. It just doesn't. Image, most notably, has been extremely successful by having an aggressive collected edition strategy. And as is the case, anytime they reduce any kind of publication, I'm worried that what he means by reducing their collected edition publications is they'll reduce the collected editions for every character that isn't Batman or Superman or the Justice League. There are more things in the DC universe than Batman, Superman, and the Justice League.
One could argue that Batman, Superman, and the Justice League don't need as many books as they already have.
I agree.
On the market. Because it takes away from the amount of dollars that the average comic book consumer has to spend on other characters. And to take chances on books. So, but yeah, this is so ass backwards. So ass backwards. And I'm trying to maintain my sanity here as I talk about this in the age of Rick Grayson and the age of the Batman wedding controversy, in the age of nothing in comics appealing to me right now, or very little, not nothing, very little in comics really appealing to me right now. But this decision is just so myopic and so indicative of why comics are in the position that they're in right now. The position where they've been for, give or take, for the better part of the last 20, 25 years, which is an extremely and increasingly niche product, an extremely and increasingly niche medium in many ways, and one that just can't seem to get out of its own way in terms of the big two. And particularly we're focusing right now on DC Comics, because I have long made the argument, as anyone that's been listening to our show, and people may disagree with this. I understand that. Not everybody agrees with this take. I have long said that the format of comics is one of the many things that needs to be looked at and overhauled. I don't believe that people consume their media the same way that they did years ago. I don't, and you've talked about that, Nick. You're a big advocate for increasing the digital marketplace of comics.
Yes.
My standpoint, I have always stumped for trades to be a bigger part of the comics landscape, because I think that, in my experience, preference-wise, I've always preferred reading trades because I feel like I'm getting more value for my money. I think value in entertainment is more important now than it's ever been before because of all the options that are out there. Netflix is however many dollars a month, and you get hours, days, potentially weeks of content on Netflix to watch. WWE Network is $9.99 a month, and
I will never be able to watch all of the content on the WWE Network the rest of my natural life. Even stuff like video games. I'm playing Red Dead Redemption, as I mentioned, and I've put, you know how many hours I've put into that game approximately, just every night seemingly that we talk to each other. I've been playing that game, and it says I'm only 66% through with it. So these are the examples of content that are giving me value for my dollar. I buy a comic book and I read 24 pages, 20 pages, something like that, and it's over. And that's it. And that's why trades have always been appealing to me. And I think trades are appealing to a lot of people that are used to binging products now. Binge watching Netflix, binge watching old shows, Friends or whatever. People want to binge read their stories. They don't want to read it and then have to wait another 30 days to get the next part of their story. This is just such a backwards way of thinking and moving in a direction that is not going to attract new readers. It's going to keep yourself insulated to those, to selling 120,000 copies of your top selling book or whatever. Like, if you're happy with that, I guess that's fine, but you're going to get us and you're going to get the people that are already indoctrinated, and you're not going to get anybody else.
I mean, I don't remember who the guy was, but I read the transcript of the keynote address that at this Comics Pro convention that recently took place. And the guy's central thesis was, recently we have seen publication efforts and efforts aimed at new readers, such as the Walmart exclusive comics or the Target exclusive comics or what have you, trying to get comics onto the shelves of big box retailers such as Walmart, Target, Toys R Us, what have you, GameStop, another example that was thrown out there. And the guy's point was, he's been in the industry 25 years, and there have always been those efforts, and that he thought it was time to, quote, get back to having what was the quote? Something like, get back to selling comics to real to comics fans who want to buy comics from comic stores who want to sell comics or something like that. And to me, that's
the wrong way.
That's the wrong way to go.
Because
we're all going to die.
Yes. Let's face it, most of us are fat. Most of us are in bad health.
Yes.
So we're all going to die at some point. Well, everybody will anyway, but we'll die earlier than most, in fact.
Right.
So you have a diminishing audience built in. People are not consuming being a slave to a format that, because it's been that way for 80 years, is dumb. And we speak from experience from our previous professional lives, will lead you to extinction.
Yes.
Because we both worked in the newspaper industry, and one of the litany of reasons why newspapers are going under, and pretty much, unfortunately, many of them anyway are in bad shape, is because of the idiotic nostalgia for the past and clinging on to the way it's always been in terms of format, in terms of printing, in terms of doing things a certain way, because that's just the way it's done. It doesn't have to be. The original graphic novel is a viable way to tell stories. We've seen that with DC's Earth 1 line. We've seen that with various Marvel books over the years.
Especially when you pair that complete story with an instantaneous digital approach.
Yes. The ability to read a book on your phone, on your tablet, on your computer, whatever.
At a moment's desire, yes.
At a moment's desire. Something like, for instance, if Watchmen were being written today, I would advocate 100% for it to be sold in trade format. Screw the single issues. Just sell it as one giant book. That's how most people are going to consume it and going to want to consume it. They're not going to have the patience to wait another 30 days to find out the mystery of who killed the comedian. They want everything now. And to most importantly, do it at their own pace. To be able to put a book down and pick it back up when you want to pick it up, not when it comes out. So there's just so many problems right now, and I agree with you, Nick. I think that this move by DC I'm not blaming Dan Didio for the move, because I think this was a corporate move that he's having to now spin in as positive a manner as possible. So I empathize with him in that manner. But man, I just hate DC's approach to this. I think it's It's the wrong way to go about it. It's just as wrong, by the way, as what Marvel is doing with glutting the market. I do agree with one of the things Dan Didio said, which is that, or implied rather, which is that Marvel is putting out too much product, as is DC. I agree with that. However, this is not the answer.
Putting out too much product has been an industry technique between the big two, where both of them at various times throughout their history have flooded the market with product in an attempt to essentially choke out their largest direct competitor. If Marvel floods the market, they're thinking people will spend their dollars that they have to spend, on more of these Marvel titles and fewer DC books. DC has done the same thing throughout the decades. This is not a problem that is new. It doesn't make it right, but it's not a new issue that Dan Didio woke up yesterday and said, "Oh man, this sucks. Well, how can we fix this?" It's never going to go away, probably.
And it was, and I believe it was Didio who's one of the guys that was committed to that, putting out 50 toques every month at least as a thing. Why that arbitrary number? Why does it have to be that?
No one knows. I just, between their creative direction at the moment, and it sucks because 3 years ago, not even 3 years ago, 2 years ago, I would say, it felt like we were writing, at least in my fandom, like an all-time high for DC creatively. And now,
it was the most excited I've been about comic books in many years. I was refreshed and I was invigorated, and they've just sort of beaten that out of me now.
Yep. Between the creative direction and now the corporate direction, it's really, really hard to be a quote DC guy right now. It's tough. Not a good place to be in recent months.
Right. And for me, it's kind of translated into an apathy. You've heard it in our reading and watching segments. I'm just so apathetic towards catching up on stuff because I've got a year worth of comics more at this point to catch up on. And other than Doomsday Clock, I'm just not motivated really to read any of it. I like the first issue of Shazam quite a bit, but I still am not just dying to read it when it comes out the way I was a lot of the Rebirth books. It's a good, very good book, and I'll probably continue pulling it and hopefully reading it. But it's just, the excitement is not there, and it's not because I don't want to like comics. It's not because I don't like comics even. It's just that right now I'm in a dry spell of interest. And, I know I'm excited about that Lois Lane book that's coming out, but it's just isolated projects here and there. And otherwise, I'm just like, you know what? Instead of buying a comic, I'd rather spend my time watching wrestling that I haven't watched before, or watching movies that I need to catch up on, or watching the TV shows, or playing games. I've started gaming again now, thanks to Red Dead, and it's fun. I haven't played video games in a long time because I've been consumed with other stuff. So it's up to comics, in other words, to invigorate me back, or, as we talked about offline, to focus on a niche product to appeal to me and overhaul their lines to appeal to a new generation of readers, which that's perhaps a longer form topic that we don't want to get to tonight. But I don't know, Nick, it's a dry time right now. Not to say that there aren't good books being published. I am positive that there are, but whew, boy, it's gotten to a point where it's not worth the hassle for me right now.
Yeah, I agree, but you're right. This is just another drop in the bucket of a larger discussion that would make for a good one-off podcast, apparently, at some point. But that's neither here nor there today.
Mm-hmm. Well, with all that being said, that is the end of the rundown. Mm-hmm. And what do we have coming? Well, actually, let's go ahead and tell folks what we got coming their way next week, and then I'll take a look and see if I can find the digital stopwatch somewhere.
Yeah, next week, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be taking a look at some Carol Danvers comics, as we're going to do a Longbook hunt on
the first volume of Kelly Sue DeConnick, right?
The first volume of Kelly Sue DeConnick's 2014 relaunch of the character, alongside David Lopez as the penciler. This is kind of the run that is most credited with elevating the status of Carol Danvers in recent years. So we're looking forward to jumping into that. We'll then, of course, be following that up with a very special full-length review of the Captain Marvel theatrical film, and then wrapping up the month by looking at one of the newer characters, Kamala Khan, and looking at an animated film.
Yes.
That was released recently called Mar-Vell Rising Secret Warriors, that has Kamala Khan and, to a lesser extent, Carol Danvers featured heavily amongst the cast. So, kind of exposing you to the three predominant, most popular generations of the Marvel legacy in the Marvel Universe. So, looking forward to all of that.
Indeed so. And, looking at the digital stopwatch over here, I can't help but notice, Nick, that there's a minute on the clock. That means that it's time for the Wrestling Minute. Man, a lot of stuff happening in the wrestling world right now. We've got a road to WrestleMania being paved right now in various directions. Big Dave Bautista's back now as a heel, no less. We've got all kinds of stuff going on, Nick. What's catching your eye in the wrestling world?
Oh, lots of things, including the SmackDown, the WWE Championship title picture as we get ready to head into Fastlane next week, and then WrestleMania coming up. Which what are your thoughts on that title picture, Greg?
I, for one, am very happy with what's happened because I feel like Kofi Kingston, a wrestler I like and support, is going to finally get his opportunity at WrestleMania to get a shot at the WWE Championship. And I'm happy that Kevin Owens has returned from injury. There appears to be something wrong with your sinuses, Nick. Are you okay?
No, I'm fine.
Issues?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that Kofi Kingston optimism is working out for you, Greg.
Power of positivity, Nick.
There you go.
Absolutely, power of positivity. So I'm digging that. And yeah, I thought SmackDown in particular was very good this week. Very entertaining show. The Hardy Boys looked like they were in good shape and working well together, and definitely much needed in the SmackDown tag division.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Very tag teams there.
Not enough quality tag teams over on SmackDown,
Right. And Raw was pretty good too, I thought. What'd you think of that last angle there, Nick?
I had mixed feelings about it. The execution of it was great. I do not look forward to 6 weeks of babyface Triple H defending the honor of Ric Flair on my airwaves. But you take the good, you take the bad, you take them both, and there you have Monday Night Raw most weeks. So there you go.
That's right. You have both?
Doesn't everybody?
No! Anyway, yes, good week of wrestling here from WWE. New Japan, of course, is trucking along. AEW is building towards its premiere event. So a lot going on in the world of wrestling. Impact Wrestling presumably still exists.
Presumably.
So just a lot of stuff going on right now. Well, that brings an end to the Wrestling Minute. Hope you've all enjoyed that slip into the space-time continuum. And that being said, folks, I think that we're just about done here on the show.
We are, of course, just about done here on the show. And, as Greg, we said there during the Wrestling Minute is, of course, WrestleMania season. And one of my favorite things, Greg, has always been in recent years, when we get to go to WrestleMania, meet up with members of Place to Be Nation. We won't be going this year, but I know other people are making the trip northward to the New Jersey, New York area. And they'll be getting together. And I kind of wanted to throw out a song for our good friend Hall of Famer Jim Ross, WWE Hall of Famer Jim Ross, to perform this week that I think could really, I'm going to make a motion that this become the official theme song of Place to Be Nation for no reason whatsoever. So, good old JR, take it away.
Thank you very much, Mr. Duke. I really appreciate it. No sarcasm there, by the way. I really do appreciate it. And I want to appreciate all our sponsors. Well, one of our sponsors is Sugar Smacks. Now, Sugar Smacks are, when you're talking about cereals, folks, this is the top of the line. This is the kind of cereal that is, well, it's been described as the Casper mattress of cereals. And anyway, this is a little song, a little tune that I heard back in the day that I've decided to sing right here, right now, to express my favorite part of Sugar Smack cereal. Sugar. Oh, honey, honey. You are my candy girl, and you got me wanting you. Honey. Oh, sugar, sugar. You are my candy girl, quite frankly, and you got me wanting you. I just can't believe the loneliness of loving you. I just can't believe it's true. I just can't believe what I am reading on the internet right now, that the one to love this feeling to you. I just can't believe it's true that it's you, quite frankly. Now, I know there's Richards out there that are going to doubt that, oh, JR's just a miserable old bastard. Oh, JR's just a miserable old man. Oh, he's bitter. He's bitter. I'm not bitter about anything, folks. I have had a great career, an even better life. I am very appreciative of the things that I have. Anyway, things such as, oh, sugar. Oh, honey, honey. You're my candy girl, and you got me wanting you. Oh, honey. Oh, sugar, sugar. You are my candy girl, and you got me wanting you. You know, when I kissed you, girl, I knew how sweet a kiss could be. I know how sweet a kiss can be. Like the summer sunshine, pour your sweetness all over me. That's a little bit lewd, quite frankly. I do not want you, I do not want Razor Ramon or Diesel or any of those X-Pac, any of those Click guys to pour their sweetness all over me. That's a little bit too much. I love a good rib as much as the next guy, but folks, have a little decorum, have a little class, quite frankly. Anyway, all sugar, pour a little sugar on it. Again, we're getting a little lewd with these lyrics. I don't like it. My father wouldn't appreciate it. My mother wouldn't appreciate it. Bill Watts wouldn't appreciate it. Pour a little sugar on it, baby. I'm going to make your life so sweet. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Pour a little sugar on it. Oh, yeah. Pour a little sugar on it, honey. Pour a little sugar on it, baby. I'm going to make your life so sweet. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Pour a little sugar on it, honey. Oh, sugar. Oh, honey, honey. You're my candy girl. You got me wanting you. Oh, honey, honey, sugar, sugar. Honey, honey, sugar, sugar. Thanks, young JR. You are my candy girl.